All right, so hello there. I'm playing around with these Google Hangouts, and I'm trying to figure out exactly who I'm sending invitations to. So I've been doing a couple where I just select my circles, and I guess that's going out to kind of getting broadcast to everyone that's in my circles. So if these are really annoying you and irritating you, let me know, and I'll try and stop doing it. But I thought I'd do it for a little while and just see if anybody wants to hop on and join in these conversations. This one that I wanted to talk about tonight, and I've been thinking about it for a long time, and you may have noticed in some of my interviews I'm starting to bring it up a little bit, is spirituality. And, obviously, spirituality plays a big role for a lot of people um, in all kinds of aspects of life, but also you see it popping up a lot in terms of diet and health and nutrition. And I thought I'd just like to say a few words about how we perceive spirituality. Sometimes we'll hear the term spiritual woo-woo bullshit, and I might have even used that myself sometimes. But you know, does a phrase like that kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak? You know, Spirituality obviously plays an important role for a lot of people, and the fact that we can't define it concretely doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. That's not to say that there aren't people who use spirituality to make money, even though they may not themselves be spiritual. And it also doesn't mean that there's not some folks out there who are kind of using a spiritual language that is so vague and indefinable that it becomes it can become distracting, let's say. So I guess what I'm interested in is clarifying, what can we say about spirituality? How can we define it? And what can we say about the actual consequences that come from it in terms of the real world? And of course, within this we have religion. Some people say that they prefer the term spirituality to religion. They don't want to even use the term religion. But let's be honest, there's kind of overlap. So usually with religions, there's certain language or perhaps a dogma that's associated with a particular religion, and within that, there are spiritual phenomena that occur. And you could say that before spirituality became the buzzword or the more acceptable term, what occurs with spirituality was occurring within religious environments and still does, right? So another thing I wanted to touch on is the fact that different people within different religious systems can have similar spiritual experiences. And those spiritual experiences can be emotionally powerful and life-changing, even if they're happening within a system that holds to an ideology that others might consider to be detrimental, harmful, or even ignorant. So, so one of the ways I like to look at it is that there's kind of an evolution of consciousness, and perhaps maybe this is an oversimplification, but one way I look at it is that love, if love is being expressed, if love is something you can identify from someone's actions, you could say in a very general way that love is an expression of a high level of spiritual consciousness. So the degree, according to this standard that I'm setting up, the degree to which a religion or a spiritual approach to life expresses love could be the degree to which we can say it is conscious. And I would say a low level of religious or spiritual consciousness is strapping on a bomb and blowing up a bunch of innocent people. That is, I guess, a kind of religion and spirituality, but it's a pretty low kind. It's not very advanced. It's not very advanced in a consciousness sense. So I think we can say that a conscious spiritual interaction with life is one that promotes life, one that facilitates life, one that is not aggressive or harmful or destructive. And that being said, even within religious systems or spiritual systems that I might not consider to be very evolved in terms of consciousness, they are higher than some other levels of consciousness. You know, I used to have a line I liked that an axe murder is beneath a fundamental religious person. you know, uh, now maybe there are some fundamental religious folks that are axe murderers too, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. I'm saying, sometimes fundamental religious types can be so fanatical that they end up, their belief system leads them into a kind of unconscious, unloving behavior that's very detrimental to society and themselves. It's just, highly questionable morally. Doesn't fit in with the culture. These are people who end up either getting put in jail or executed for their actions. But my point is, we do have some even lower levels of consciousness than, say, a fundamental religious orientation. And then within this huge jambalaya of religions, there's all these varying levels of consciousness. And you could even have, within one religious system, you can have some members who are very low consciousness and others that are very high consciousness, all kind of agreeing to this dogma that holds this one particular group together, and yet within that one group you've got varying levels of awareness in the members. But then looking at more broadly at all these varying religions, we have Christianity, we have Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, Zen Buddhism, the religions of Native Americans, some of the African religions, maybe shamanistic religions, nature-based religions. What's the Japanese Shintoism? So such a variety and interesting mixture. And if you were to take all this and say spiritual woo-woo bullshit, I think that is minimizing the influence that religion and spirituality has on the world and human beings. It's too simplistic. So even though that there are lots of elements within spirituality that we can't really define, we can't really get our head around, there are phenomena that occur that are personal, emotional, psychological, affect great change in our lives. We can't just say we're not going to look at it because we can't clearly define it. I think we can look at it. We can talk about it. We can say that these experiences have profound effects on us. And even atheism, the same thing can happen. You can have atheists who are rather dogmatic. They can almost become fanatical in their atheism. And then you have atheists who simply, they don't have a set belief system, and yet their behavior in the world is very praiseworthy from you could say a loving standpoint. You see these people, the way they act in the world, that their loving actions promote goodness, supporting life, promoting life, kindness, that sort of thing. So complicated, just complicated, and not easily oversimplified. I guess one thing that some people rail at, and I have before as well, is I used to teach yoga, and within yoga communities there can be a lot of use of terms that people have never really personally experienced. So you can hear lots and lots of talk about chakras and nadis and energies and certain things that are unleashed when one practices yoga, but the numbers of people that have actually experienced things in an energetic way, I think, are very small. And often what really happens is that there are body changes that people identify as energetic chakra effects. Like, you can have a blood temperature change, you can have a shift in circulation, you can have a change in breath, a change in the felt quality in the lungs, you can have a change in muscular tissue. One of the things that happens with yoga and some other forms of exercise is that your sensation becomes more refined, so that you start to feel things in a more subtle way. And sometimes just that new subtlety feels like a completely new thing, and you can identify that as some kind of metaphysical experience. It's not to say that energetic phenomena and metaphysical experiences and transcendental phenomena and what might be characterized as miraculous phenomena. It's not to say that those things cannot occur, but I think that within a lot of spiritual communities, there's a lot of talk about these things and not so many that have actually experienced them. So that, I might say, that's kind of borderline spiritual woo-woo bullshit. But the other interesting thing is those phenomena, even though they may not be experienced commonly, they can be great incentives for people to pursue a particular path. Now, you could argue that that's not a good thing. We don't want to be pursuing these things in the first place. And at least from maybe an Eastern perspective, where we're trying to get into the present moment, we don't want our practices to be governed by some distant goal that we hope to reach in the future. Hopefully, the more prominent principle behind any practice like that is to be more in the moment, right? To become more aware of what's happening right now. So these carrot and stick approaches can be a great distraction, and I think it's fair to say that many of them have devolved into that. Getting a washboard abs, I'm not saying it's wrong to have physical goals and to have physical performance goals, but I think it's interesting when they become the primary objective in what is otherwise considered to be a spiritual practice. So I guess that opens up a whole box of issues about what role does goal setting have in terms of spiritual development. And I guess different systems would approach that differently. I guess from my perspective, where the most interesting thing for me is becoming more conscious and aware in the present moment, and less having my mind occupied with the future or the past. There's less and less of a goal orientation. It's not to say that you don't still have goals, but the focus shifts, and it's also interesting to note that the emphasis that you have when you're undertaking any practice has great bearing on what you experience in the practice. In other words, if you have a future goal in mind, and that's the reason you're practicing something now, that affects the way you practice that thing now. If, on the other hand, your objective is to be as completely present in the moment as you can, and let's say as sensitive and as perceptive as possible within the moment as you can, that's going to totally change the way you're doing a practice. And to me, it's much more powerful than being clouded by some kind of future goal, which is, in essence is a fantasy. So anyway, just some of my thoughts on spirituality. I'd love to hear your all's thoughts on spirituality. Perhaps some of you have had, very moving spiritual experiences which had a strong influence in your life in general, and also in terms of dietary changes you've made. I've heard many people say that as they improve their diet and eat a more natural diet, they experience qualities that could be described as spiritual. They become more sensitive, they become more conscious of aspects of the world that they were not as conscious of before. A lot of people say that their respect and awareness of animals totally shifts, which is interesting. You could argue, well, it's probably because they're reading books and they're becoming more ethically conscious mentally. But many people have stated that they feel different. They feel a different relationship with animals, which is interesting. So anyway, just some thoughts on spirituality and what exactly it is, what aspects of it are perhaps misleading or not worthy of as much attention, and maybe some aspects of it that are useful and beneficial and necessarily they do play a big role in life. Anyway, thanks for listening, and love to hear your comments about this. Take care.